Hello and welcome to Spring Office Hours, Season 3, Episode 15, Modern Frontends with HTMX. My name is Dan Vega, Spring Developer Advocate at Broadcom, joined by my good friend and colleague, DaShaun. DaShaun, how you doing?
I'm good. I am also a Spring Developer Advocate at Broadcom, and this is my favorite time of the week. I'm just happy to be here. I'm happy that our conversation has already started. The chat starts a little bit before the show. We've had some good questions, some good conversations already. So what a great time to be a Spring developer, and what a great time to be here.
This is awesome. We've been getting some really good feedback on this show, and one of the things that kind of popped up from some conversations last week that I wanted to highlight was we sent out this huge state of Spring, like asking the developer community, the Spring community at large, all these different types of questions on how you use Spring. And one of those questions in that state of Spring was like, how do you keep up to date with everything that's going on with Spring? And I found out, we don't know the exact results yet, but I know one of those options in there was Spring Office Hours. I know a lot of you out there responded with Spring Office Hours as a way to kind of keep up to date with everything that's going on in the Spring community. And that is our goal. So I really appreciate anyone who actually added that in there. So
that is our
that's
goal.
Awesome.
This is the thing that I wish I had when I was in your seat. This is the thing I wish I had. I wish I had a weekly, just like, something I could do passively and just kind of like keep tabs on what's going, because things move fast. And thanks for the feedback. We appreciate it.
Cool. What have you been up to? Anything exciting? How's last week?
It's that time of year. We're building stuff. We're taking all the research that we do. We're taking it out to customers. We've got new Java versions. We've got new Spring releases. We got all sorts of stuff. And we just want to try to keep on top of it, right? That's the fun part. And as always, just a reminder, everybody that's here joining us live, say hello. Let us know where you're from. My mom and dad are always watching, and they love seeing where you're from. Hi, mom and dad, I love you. And this is a fun time for us. It's also a great idea for us. It's valuable for us to see where everybody's joining from. It's great to see our regulars. It's also great to see new friends, new faces. So this is wonderful.
And if you are here live in the live stream, that happens every Monday, 1 to 2 Eastern. Go ahead and ask your questions. We are going to have a special guest we'll talk more about in a second, but you want to get those questions in. This is a great chance to get them answered, and we'll have some fun with it. If you are not here in the live stream and you are joining us on the audio podcast, that's okay. You can find us wherever you get your podcast from. Take us on the run, take us in the car, on the treadmill, wherever you like to listen to your podcast. That'd be great. One thing I've been asking DaShaun is I'd love some feedback on the podcast. So if you are loving the podcast, if you're listening to it on Apple or Spotify, do us a big favor and leave us a review. Okay, I have 2 quick things that we're going to get into. I just want to talk about really quick, and then we're going to bring on a special guest that is going to help us understand how to build modern front ends with HTMX. We talked a little bit about it last week at a high level. I want to dive a little bit deeper into it today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I want to talk about a couple things. We mentioned this last week. This is coming up quickly. Spring 1 at VMware Explorer is in August, but the date that I'm looking at here is May 3rd. If you're interested in presenting at Spring 1 in Las Vegas, you'll want to go ahead and get those CFPs in. You want to go ahead and submit something. If you haven't submitted something yet, maybe you're a first timer, maybe you're interested in submitting. I know DaShaun has been working with a couple individuals on getting those abstracts ready to go. We would love to see you at Spring 1 in Las Vegas. If you need some help with that, please feel free to reach out. We'd love to help you. I can't believe like we're almost done with CFPs and we're ready to start reviewing for Las Vegas already. I mean, that's crazy. This year is starting to like fly by.
It's flying. It's going fast. But there's still plenty of time. There's like hundreds, thousands of minutes left before you have to get your CFPs in.
Exactly.
So, and if you need help, we are here to help.
Cool. One other link I just wanted to share out, last week's episode, which is taking us into this week's episode. We talked about kind of Spring Boot front ends at a high level. We sat down, we said, if you were going to build a front end for your Spring application, what are your different options? And so at a high level, we kind of mapped all these things out. We used DaShaun's extraordinary Excalidraw skills. We put this kind of visual together of like all the different options you might have. And what I did is I kind of dumped that into this repo with some links. Now, this was a very quick way of getting some of these links into a repo. As we did with the Learning Spring Resources repo, we would love your help with it. So if you can't see my screen, github.com/spring-office-hours. There's a repository for Spring front ends. I'll leave a link in the show notes for that. At the end, it says contributions are welcome. PRs are welcome, DaShaun.
PRs are always welcome.
Please get those PRs in. We'd love to kind of build this up as a resource for if you're trying to build some kind of front end to get this to be a great resource for everyone. So that's that. That's all I got for that. So as I said, we talked about a lot of things at a high level last week. One of which is HTMX. We have our good friend Thomas in the chat. Thomas has been a big help with kind of learning some of this HTMX stuff. But also I wanted to kind of dive deeper into this because we looked at it from a high overview last week. I want to dive further into this and understand what HTMX is, why we might want to reach for it. So I decided to reach out to a really good source for this and see if I could invite him on the show. And he graciously said yes. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and add him to the stage and welcome our special guest, Wim Deblauwe. How are you doing?
Hello.
Wim?
Yeah, very nice to be here. Hi, Dan, and hi, DaShaun. Hi, everybody in the chat.
Awesome to have you. So for those who don't know, I have a bunch of things that I was going to talk about and kind of hype you up. You're an author of a couple books. You presented at many conferences. But for those who don't know who Wim is, can you just give us a quick kind of rundown of who you are, what you do, kind of maybe a hobby or two that you like to do outside of this programming thing?
All right. So I'm Wim. I'm mainly a backend developer. Java backends for over 20 years now. I have currently 3 books out, one on REST APIs and then 2 on Thymeleaf and one on Thymeleaf and SSR then. And what I do outside of programming is cycling. I really like
Awesome. Awesome. What do you do anything competitive cycling, or is this just a form of exercise?
No, it's just for fun.
Yeah, I'm the same way with running. I don't really do much competitive, but I enjoy running just to stay healthy if I can. So
yeah,
Wim has a lot of fans in the chat, and
he does.
Thomas is asking, when are we going to see you next in person?
Not sure yet. I'm not coming to Barcelona, unfortunately, but I I did have put in an CFP for some other conferences, so maybe.
How about Spring One Las Vegas?
I mean,
we just talked about it. May 3rd. May 3rd is the deadline. Let's get a CFP in there.
100%.
Yeah. Let me think about it.
Okay.
All right. Okay. That'd be awesome. Okay, cool. So I have a little bit of an agenda of kind of what I want to get into today, but I think a really good. So first off, you talked about you are an author of 3 books, 2 of which are going to be kind of prevalent to today's talk: Taming Thymeleaf and Modern Frontends with HTMX. I'll have those in the show notes. Start with Taming Thymeleaf. Like, what got you into writing that book? Why Thymeleaf? There are other template engines out there. What kind of drew you to Thymeleaf?
Mainly it was the Spring Boot guides that started with Thymeleaf, basically. So that's what I started with, and I learned more about it, and I used it on a couple of projects. And then as I was referring always back to my previous project, like, how did I do that again? And I started taking notes, and then those notes grew and grew, and they became a book. And then I thought, maybe I can publish this as a book. I went on LeanPub and then published through them, which has been a great experience using LeanPub, and AsciiDoc, which is also one of my favorite authoring tools, which is really great to do that kind of thing.
So both your books are on LeanPub. So if anybody wants to find those, they can go to LeanPub, search for them, and get them there. From a Thymeleaf perspective, can you, for anyone who hasn't used Thymeleaf, can you just give us like a real quick overview of what it is, when you might want to reach for it?
Yeah, sure. So Thymeleaf is server-side rendering a template engine. So basically what it does, you give it kind of HTML code, and it uses that in combination with your Java objects, and you will render out full HTML page, which you send to the browser. That's a templating engine. There's Thymeleaf, but there's others as well. Currently, some new ones are appearing as well. But that's the main thing. So the difference with Thymeleaf and like a single page application like React or Angular thing is with Thymeleaf, you just render the HTML on the server, you send it to the browser, and the browser just renders what's the full HTML, and that's it. With React and Angular, you would send a whole bunch of JavaScript to the browser. Then that JavaScript would reach back to the server for some JSON, then transform that JSON back to some DOM elements, to some HTML, and render that in the browser.
This sounds familiar. Sounds like something I got started with. We've been doing this forever, right? So I was in a former life doing Cold Fusion, which was on the JVM, but similar thing to like ASP.NET and PHP. We were writing everything on the server. We call a server that figures out everything and sends back the full HTML payload. So this is nothing new, right? We've been doing this forever.
Yeah, true.
Cool.
I think, maybe I'm getting ahead, but HTMX really makes it a lot better, and that's like make it like 200% better.
Yeah. There are definitely some really cool pros to this. And again, we talked about it at a high level last week, and this is something I don't know a lot about. So I was interested to do a little research on it last week leading up to today's interview, and I'm definitely excited about it. We talked about SPAs, like single page applications, SSRs. From an SSR standpoint, before we even get into like HTMX, any kind of pros or cons that stick out to you about just using like SSR?
Yeah. So for starters, you don't need any JavaScript to display the page. So you can have any kind of web browser will be able to render your page, even with JavaScript disabled, or just on a very low power device. You can always render the page, no problem there. You don't depend on the speed of the client, because as developers we have like always this high-end machines, high-end iPhones or whatever phones we have, and it's a whole different experience if you're on a low power device, if you're just some kid with his first allowance money trying to get like a simple phone there, and low power devices, or all things like that. So
that's a really good point too, because I think we get stuck in this world that we live in, and we have this high bandwidth, powerful laptops, and we're just kind of used to like no friction when we're doing some of these things. But we forget like consumers of our applications are all over the world in different places where bandwidth is not as strong, or high, as you said, machines are not as powerful. So this is something we have to think about, because again, sometimes we get stuck in our lane and we're just kind of used to the things that we have. So that's a great point, that these are things that we need to consider when we're building these applications.
Yeah. But on the other side, I'm going to jump in. Like you said, hey, we started back with Cold Fusion. I was starting with JSP. We're rendering everything on the back end. And one of the things, maybe I'm dating myself, we were trying to make it so that we knew exactly what was being delivered, and we knew it was going to be compatible with whatever browser that was going to be on the front end. So we were delivering this, compliant front end. Hey, it's following the standards, and we knew, so we didn't have to like choose our JavaScript frameworks in order to get things to look right. I ended up dealing with a customer last week with JSPs. Like they still exist, they still work, and that's doing the same thing. This kind of rendering on the back end and send the page to the front end. And in our chat, we're getting all of these other things that we missed last week. So I'm hoping I'm going to ask, get those recommendations, these other languages, the site mesh, which I haven't heard in a long time, and some others, the Pebble template. Like these are just great. Like keep those things coming and ask your questions. I'm putting stars on it so that hopefully we can get to it at the end when we do a Q&A. So, thanks. Go ahead, Wim.
Cool.
Yeah. Sure. One other thing is search engines. If
Big,
you,
yeah.
search engines won't run your JavaScript. So if you have like really public website and you want to be found by search engines and properly indexed, then using server-side rendering is a lot better, because the bot can just crawl your HTML and see everything it needs to see. And otherwise it just sees an empty index.html and a bunch of JavaScript that it probably won't execute.
Yeah, and I saw one thing, again, some of the research I did for today was I watched your conference talk from last year's Spring I/O. And one of the things that kind of stuck out to me was, hey, some of these things aren't so bad, right? Like full page refreshes sound like a terrible thing, but hey, there's some things that are pretty good about this, right? As long as these page reloads are fast. You mentioned a couple things like, hey, you still get access to things like bookmarks. You get access to like the browser back button. So in certain scenarios, a full page refresh might make sense as long as it meets some of this criteria. But in other scenarios, maybe we don't want to refresh the whole page. Maybe we want to just update some data. And so leading into that, we'll probably talk about that when we get into some HTMX. So I think I'll start there. If somebody has, we've kind of talked about building Spring applications. If somebody's used to building a Spring application, like with a REST API, now we're switching over to, instead of like sending JSON back, we build a controller. We use a template engine like Thymeleaf, and we render a template that basically sends back all of the HTML to the client. So understanding that and kind of server-side rendering, what is HTMX? Why are we talking about HTMX today? What is it at a high level? What problems can it solve?
All right. So HTMX is a JavaScript library. It runs in the browser, and it kind of augments the HTML. So like we said, with just Thymeleaf or any other server-side rendering technique, you always have this full page refresh, which kind of makes it for a bad experience. It's not what people are used to nowadays in a modern web app. So HTMX, it's very simple in its essence, is that you can take a piece of the HTML and swap it out with a different piece of HTML you get back from the server. And HTMX is really not about Spring or any other server-side technology. You can use it. People use it all the time with Django. They use it with PHP. They use it with .NET. They use it with any kind of server technology. As long as your server can return HTML, you can use HTMX.
Nice.
So maybe to make it more concrete, I can give a small demo.
Yeah, that'd be great. Let's go ahead and share your screen.
All right. So I hope everybody can see the screen all right. Yep. As you can see, it's kind of a bug tracker clone I built here. So when we refresh the page, it just renders the full HTML. Nothing special is happening. Now, if I clean out the network tab here, you can see there's this little arrow, little pencil, I'm sorry, that appears with just some CSS. And then if you click it, there's a call to the server. And what happens is this call to the server will just do a call to a certain URL. And we will see here that it's an HX request. So this means it's call done by HTMX. And the response is a div and a form with an input. And this whole div gets swapped into a place where there was like just a text field before. Now we have this input field. So now I can just edit this, type something, press enter. And again, now there's again a request to the server with a put. So it updates this summary and I get a response back. And the response is now again just the div with the text and the SVG icon there that appears on hover. So that's really the basic of HTMX. You just add a few attributes. So here you can see this HX get and the HX swap that happens if you click there. But you just swap in little pieces of HTML back and forward. So you get this very rich experience very easy to edit, as you would expect. But you don't need any special JavaScript library, just some attributes in your HTML, and you're good to go.
I'm not gonna lie.
So I was
that
going to
looked pretty
say,
slick.
oh yeah,
That was for the short demo. That was slick. We had an element. We changed that element. We saw a single call to the back end, but the page didn't get reloaded. So all the rest of the metadata for that page was still there. Then you had this edit form. And when you say the edit form, one single call with just that data, that was slick. And I'm thinking back to all the years and all the pain and all the frameworks that I've tried where it wasn't that slick and it was painful. So I'm in now. After seeing that short demo, now I'm like, tell me more.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is really a way to progressively enhance your web applications, right? Like normally, if you showed me a demo like that, I would say, hey, you built this in some kind of like JavaScript framework, right? Because that's typically what we've been doing for years. But with HTMX, you can just kind of use the tools that you're used to using. In our case, Spring Boot, Thymeleaf. You're adding in some HTMX in there to make this progressively enhanced, to give it this kind of dynamic behavior, right? So this is pretty exciting for those of us who want to build these dynamic web applications, but don't want to have to shift to some kind of JavaScript component framework and learn that whole stack, right? So yeah, JitterTed has a really good comment there. Ability to swap out tiny portions of the page, the DOM, without reloading the page is so much fun now with HTMX. And that kind of really speaks to what it's doing, right? So it doesn't have to refresh the page. As you said, it has this little like container. So whatever element that is, it says, hey, go refresh this particular piece of thing. So
yeah, and
just looking at
any element you have on your page can be a trigger for a request. So it can be just a div or an input or whatever. It can be anything. It can trigger the request. And I think the point you mentioned before is very important. You can just add it on top of your existing website. If you now have like a website or a web application that's already 5 years old or something, and you want to, you think about, oh, I need some more modern features in there. You don't have to rewrite it. Just add HTMX where it makes sense, where it will give you like 80% of the need with 20% of what you need to do. Just adding some calls there and just where you need it. And the rest of you can still have page refreshes for other links or for other things, but
that
on the
comment
that matter most, you can add HTMX to make it dynamic.
That trade-off, you said, you get the functionality that you want, but I don't have to go and learn another JavaScript framework?
Nope.
This sounds too good to be true. Is this real? Because the sense that I get here is, especially for my skill set that I have, like, hey, I can fight my way through a DOM, but trying to keep up with all the JavaScript frameworks, and a lot of times I'm bringing in those frameworks so I can do something as simple as what you just showed. But I don't have to do that. This story keeps on getting better. Tell me more.
One thing I wanted to mention there is to make this happen, you bring in HTMX, and you can use like your HTML attributes. It can kind of be attached to any HTML element. What's the learning curve when it comes to HTMX? Is there a lot to learn there? A lot of different things that you can do with it?
You can start it very simple. You just need like hxget to do a get request, hxpost URL. You already know how to return HTML if you know Thymeleaf or your favorite template engine. So that's really great. And you can then take it further from there. You can pick parts of the response. You don't even have to have like a dedicated endpoint that returns a smaller bit of HTML. You can just like say, oh, give me just a portion of the HTML. It's bandwidth-wise not optimal, but you can start there and then make it better as you go along, as you have more time, or if you want to have more fun with it. So for me, it was as Clint is putting it. Hi, Clint, by the way. The biggest, it's really very simple. Yeah.
Awesome.
It's too good to be true.
I think, we talked about like, we have like these containers and we may just kind of refresh the DOM with some HTML. I know I had this question when I first heard HTMX2 and I saw it earlier in the chat, and I was like, hey, why doesn't HTMX support JSON, right? And then I see we have some answers to that, but the kind of point of this is we are not building REST API endpoints that push JSON back to the client and then have to turn that into something that's markup, right? The idea here is you have some HTML and I just want to replace that HTML. So why go get JSON and have to like deserialize that into like a markup? Why don't I just go right to the source and get the HTML that I want from, in this case, my Spring Boot controller?
Yeah, true.
Cool. Yeah, so there's another question. It supports JSON, but it's bad use. Yeah, so in this case, we really are just interested in returning the HTML that we want to kind of swap out in that instance. Okay, so that's a little bit of kind of an overview of what HTMX is. We saw a demo. I know I was looking on the HTMX website. If you want to kind of dive further into like use cases, or the docs are pretty good on htmx.org. If you want to kind of get involved, like get started, that's a really good place to go. I guess from a use case standpoint, based on whatever I'm building, what's a good use case for like kind of experimenting with HTMX, and maybe what's not a good use case? Like when would I not reach?
So in my let's say day-to-day projects, I'm mainly working with React and Angular frontends, because that's where like the front-end people, they have their skill sets, and if you're on a bigger team, that's usually the split that happens nowadays. Yep. But even in those projects, we have like you usually have some admin pages for yourself that the customer doesn't need to see, but just for supporting the app. For me, that's where I pull out my Thymeleaf and HTMX and have these kind of things like a migration page. That's the kind of use case we're dealing with right now at work. There I'm using that, so I kind of sneak it in there, and then everybody says, "Oh, did you do that so fast? Was it so easy?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's just that." And so I kind of try to advocate, let's say, through that way, and I think many of us can also start there if you want. Just to get a feel for it without really already betting a full project on that if you're not familiar yet with it.
Yeah, you mentioned some of the times we have this like split in organization. So yeah, our front end's built in React, our back end's built in Java and Spring Boot. But maybe I'm just tinkering with something on the weekends and it's just me. Maybe I don't want to have that split. Maybe I want everything in a single artifact that I can deploy to production without having to manage those different assets, right? Right. So even in that case, I think it's a good fit. We've talked about like Vaadin and Hilla in the same breath of like, one of the things you mentioned was like SSR. Like even if I'm putting something out like a blog, this is a good fit for that because we are using server-side rendering. The search engines are going to pick up our content. So really it comes down to an architecture choice, right? Like if I'm building something that I'm just doing or a small team is doing and we don't need to split those applications out, this seems like a really good fit because I can do everything in one project and just deploy it to production.
All right. Yeah, true. I see one question coming up that I would like to answer. Can HTMX end up in something that will look professional? I think it's a good question, and you might question my CSS skills from the demo I just gave. But sure thing, it's just HTML and CSS, and that's also what React developers need to use to show something on the screen, and Angular developers, and everybody is using that same thing. So for sure, if you put in the time, you can make it look professional, no problem there.
Yeah, I think people hear like, back office application or just admin screens and think they need to look ugly. They don't need to. We can do the same things the React developers are doing, right?
If it looks too good, then it can't be like a real application. Right?
We can go ahead and we can pull in Tailwind. I'm a big fan of Tailwind. We could pull that in and use that. So great point there. Okay. So some good use cases for when to use it, when not to use it. I noticed something. So I started going through all this. I started learning some things. And then I noticed you had a library out there. So if you go to github.com your username, there's a library called HTMX Spring Boot. Again, I'll have this in the show notes. I saw Oliver Dropbomb help with this library as well. Can you talk a little bit about, you don't really need this library because you can use HTMX, as you said, kind of language agnostic and be used in any kind of language and template engine, but there is a library to help with this. What is that library there for?
Not just Oliver helped, also Clint, who is currently in the chat. So awesome. Thank you, Clint, as well. Yay. He also helped with that. So what this library does, it helps you if you need to return, if you have the same endpoint and you want to have it return or a full page if it's the initial page load, or just a snippet of the page when it's an HTMX request. So you can just annotate your controller method with each response, and then it will automatically see if the request came from HTMX, do one thing or the other thing. So that's one of the things it does, and it also makes it possible to use out-of-bound swaps, and that's maybe a difficult to understand word, but I can. If you give me just a second, I have a demo as well on that, and maybe that will clear things up a bit.
Yeah, that'd be great. Let's go ahead. Do we have any?
I like Clint's question. Can you talk about how this might be leveraged for micro front ends? I recently got to listen to Matt Rabel. He's got some great talks on micro front ends, and this is exactly where my head goes. This idea, like, hey, I'm going to deliver this back end component, and here's the front end, here's the components, here's the UI for everything that this API might provide. So you can just basically add this front end component into your micro front end, or it becomes the micro front end for that feature that you're delivering on the back end. So I'm automatically putting these two together. Clint, thanks for asking that question, because that's what was going on in my head. But yeah, maybe we'll get to that too.
All right. Are you ready? Do you want me to share your screen, Wim?
Yeah, that would be.
All right. Let me go ahead and throw that up there.
So this is another demo from my book. It simulates a timesheet application. So you have the current week there, and then some projects that you need to fill in timesheets for. So these are just some, I can show you, they are just some input elements. And they have this, I don't know if that's big enough to read, but they have an hx put with a URL there. And then the trigger is a key up, changed, delay 500 milliseconds. So by just adding key up, changed, delay 500 milliseconds, I get this back off. So I can type, and there's only a request happening when I wait like 500 milliseconds.
That's
so, but the cool thing is, when I stop typing, there's the put request is done to the server, and in the response we get. I cannot make this. Maybe I can make it a bit bigger. So what we get back is two divs. We get the div that gets replaced in the top right corner with the overall total, and we get another div that replaces the day summary. So this is what they call what is called out-of-bound swaps. So you can return multiple snippets of HTML from the server that will be rendered or replaced in different places on the page.
Oh, wow. So, and this is something that your library helps with, right? Because I know in general, if I have a Spring Boot controller, I only return one thing from that. I return like some type of model or I return the either the template or the fragment, but I'm returning one thing. So I think your library really helps with this, returning multiple fragments, right? Is that how that works?
Yeah, indeed. Because there's like two ways of, if you need to update other content on the page. Sometimes you have this, like in this example, you want, as soon as you type some number in, you want the day total to update, and you want the overall total to update, obviously.
Yeah.
So, or you would have to do like multiple calls to the server to update the totals, which is also something you could do. But with these out-of-bound swaps, you can just return everything in one go from the server, and it will update as long as the IDs match. HTMX knows where it needs to update what, you can then update multiple places at the same time.
I think what you're talking about though is so if you update one of those inputs, you make a call, it updates it on the server. You can do something with like an event that publishes back in like a response header, right? So now my front end knows, hey, I got to go call another endpoint to update that totals. So you could do that with events, but that makes 2 calls. But in your case, using this out of bounds technique, you can only make 1 call and get all the information you need in one fell swoop.
Yep, that's it.
Awesome. That's awesome. Cool.
My mind is racing, right? There's tons of stuff here. But I keep coming back to, I don't have to go out and learn Angular or React. One of the things that's in my head is, do I need, or can I deliver this inside of an Angular React? And I think the answer is yes, right? Like if I'm a backend, I'm comfortable in Java and Thymeleaf, I can start deliver these HTMX elements, and I can hand those off to my front-end engineers. Is that true? Good use case, bad use case?
I'm not sure if I understand your question completely.
I'm thinking about how I can start to make my work shown. That's one of the big things, right? Is as a Spring developer, one of the things that we want to make sure is that we're making our work shown and having some kind of front end delivered with these. And I could deliver this a simple UI, my Thymeleaf UI, like you just showed, but I could have that same functionality, that HTMX element. I could hand that off to my front end. That's going to make it professional. My front end developer.
Yeah, sure. And that's one of the big advantages of Thymeleaf compared to others. They're natural templates, as they're called. So they're just HTML. And so a designer can really work with them if you want to. You can really work closely with the designer.
Even if they've never touched Thymeleaf, right? Like they can open that up as an HTML file and they know how to work in there. So
this is interesting. Clint's comment here says the beauty of out-of-band swaps, or as Jitter Ted calls it, a retargeted swap, is you can push a change from the server to another part of the page, or you could emit HTMX specific header to the page to tell it to pull in some new data. This is an interesting use case. Tell me more.
That's really what we were talking about, right? So being able to like publish an event and say, hey, somebody needs, something happened, a new to-do item was added, go ahead and react to that. So go fetch another, make another GET call to an endpoint to kind of update that total. Yeah. Or in the other case, just send everything back in one fell swoop.
I have a demo like that as well, like a simple to-do app, and it shows like the total number of to-do items. And as you add a to-do item on the browser side, it emits an event like an item was added. And then there's another element on the page that listens for that and will update itself by calling into the server, like how many elements are there now, and it will update itself. So that's also something you can do.
So it sounds like if you wanted to dive into this stuff a little bit further, we should really pick up your book, because it sounds like there's a lot of really good examples in there and walking through that. What do you kind of cover? I know you have your Taming Thymeleaf book. That is really specifically on Thymeleaf, right? Like, so if you've never touched Thymeleaf before, that's probably a good place to start. But if you know Thymeleaf and you want to jump into some of this HTMX stuff, modern front ends with the HTMX is really the place to go. Can you just talk at a high level, like what you cover in that book?
Sure. So each chapter is like a different demo where I explain from the start just the basics. And then I go through more advanced use cases like we've seen with the out-of-bound swaps. I also talk about security. How do you deal with security? How do you avoid that? Because like the swapping is really nice, but what could happen if you're not careful is that suddenly your login page is your login form is swapped into a place where you don't want it because session timed out. I explain how to avoid these kind of things.
That's good.
And then I go to as well to server-side events that send out data for streaming logs, for example. You can do that as well. And then the end example is with WebSockets, where you build a chat app.
Awesome.
Yeah, that Jitter Ted brought up that a couple of times, that it's just as easy to do with WebSocket-based applications. So yeah, if this is included in your book, that sounds.
And also now I'm thinking also error handling. That's also important. Obviously, if something goes wrong, you want to inform your user. And if you're not using HTMX, it's easier because then you get an error from the server and the full page is blank and it's ugly, but it's easy. You don't have to do much. So with HTMX, there's some things you need to know, and I explain them in the book how you can make sure you get a really good user experience.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Other things about security, right? If session times out, could I have a trigger on my session timeout and have my element not loaded in the wrong place, but also cores and cross-site scripting? What are some of these other regular
Cores is
topics?
normally not an issue since you're just on the server, so that's easier than with a single page application.
I know that's something that always catches single page applications. The first time you try and talk to that REST endpoint and that chorus comes up, and now I need to figure out how to configure that. So that's one thing we get to avoid. And I think Ted mentioned this in the chat earlier. Another thing we get to avoid is on the JavaScript front end, we have all these like complicated build steps to like put all these pieces together, and we get to kind of avoid that as well. Again, as a Spring Boot developer, this is really great because I just get to package my application how I would, and there's no other complicated build steps. So I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah. What I do is I also have a command line tool, which using the Spring CLI thingy library.
Spring Shell?
Yeah, Spring Shell. Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
I got the name for a moment there.
That's awesome.
And that generates a Spring Boot project with Thymeleaf, and you can select like if you want Tailwind or not, and it builds the whole project setup, and then with live reload and everything you need to quickly build.
Wow, I'm interested in seeing this. Is this on your GitHub as well? Yeah, because I'm interested. Like, I haven't actually built anything with HTMX. I want to dive in and build some of this stuff, but like with HTMX, like, do you include? Is there like a script you have to include to get that in there on the front end with things like you said, if you want to choose like Tailwind, how do you include that? Because you don't want to just include like the static Tailwind install because then you kind of pull everything in.
Yeah.
So I'm interested how you do that.
Yeah. So what I do is I'm using NPM because all those tools are on NPM, and there's the Maven frontend plugin that can trigger NPM.
Yeah.
And so I'm using NPM to build the live reload thing, and to also to build the front end assets like the Tailwind compilation, let's say, and things like that.
That's awesome because a lot of the front end frameworks have similar CI tools, right? Like, hey, what am I trying to build? Do you want to use NPM or PNPM? Do you want to use Tailwind? Do you want to use this config? So that's awesome. Yeah, I'll have to definitely check that out.
And it's cool seems like it uses the Spring Initializer REST API, so it's you can just select the same things I can do on the initializer, and then add some more stuff on top of that for the the front end stuff.
Definitely gonna check that out. Cool. Got a question here.
I was pulling it up. There you go.
Oh, sorry. Well, I got a question here in the chat. Says, where I had trouble is when the browser is idle for long and Spring Security tries to redirect to your OIDC provider. Does that sound?
Sense. Yeah, that makes sense. So it seems like that was my question. Like, hey, could I trigger on like a session expiry? Which I think the answer is yes. But again, this is one of those things. This is one of those things that you want to handle. Is if I see a redirect and I don't have a session, then maybe I need to take some other action versus just changing one element. But have you run into this, Wim? Do you have any feedback here?
No. I must say I didn't have any issue with that. I'm also using I'm using Keycloak as my provider there, and yeah, it seemed to work fine for me. So I'm not sure.
Cool.
Excellent.
All right. Do we have some questions? I think I've kind of covered most. Actually, one other thing I wanted to mention. Actually, two quick things, two quick thoughts. We've talked a lot about Thymeleaf and HTMX. This will work with other template engines, correct? This isn't
sure.
specific to Thymeleaf.
So also the library we talked about, there's like a part that's neutral to whatever templating language you use, because it's mostly annotations for your controllers. And then there's a small part that helps a bit if you're on Thymeleaf, but it's optional.
Because it brings in like a Thymeleaf dialect and right? Okay. And then I saw a friend, Josh Long, who did some kind of demos on using both your library and Thymeleaf. He also mentioned like Hyperscript. Do you use Hyperscript at all? Where does that kind of come into play?
Yeah, so Hyperscript is also a library by the same author of the guy who is creating HTMX. Awesome. And it's mainly a JavaScript alternative. Makes it, it's like quite human readable thing and makes some things really easy. I'm not using it in my book. Well, because I think HTMX in itself is very strong, and the Hyperscript is very opinionated, and I think we should see them separately. I like to use Alpine.js for because you cannot do everything with HTMX. Like if you want to toggle like just a pop-up window, you probably use something like Alpine or just Vanilla.js, or you can even bring in Vue if you want. But like Alpine is really fit for the use case there. Because it's quite similar to Vue, but it's a little bit more lightweight. For these things. So I like to use Alpine. I think it's more widely known than Hyperscript. So in my book, for those examples, I'm using Alpine.
Cool. Yeah. Good to know. All right, DaShaun, I think we've come to everything that I wanted to get through. Do we have some questions that we can talk about?
The first one is like, man, this is like, hey, we've talked now. For the second week, we've talked about these front ends, like which one's the best, right? We have that question, like which one of these is the best? What should I use? What's the answer here?
What do you know?
I love that answer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the best is very subjective as always. What are your requirements? What is the team? What do you know? I think those three should give you a good example. But I think there's three main things there. There's the full SPA framework, React, Angular. Then in the middle you have HTMX and Thymeleaf, I think. And then if you really don't want to touch any HTML, you can go to something like Hilla and what's the other thing called? Vaadin. Vaadin. So then, but then maybe if you're now a front-end developer, I think you can go from being a React or an Angular developer to being a Thymeleaf/HTMX developer, because it's still HTML and you will still have some JavaScript that you can do. But making the jump to Vaadin, that's full Java. Okay, if you're a full Java shop, that's certainly a good idea, but not if you want to transition there, I guess.
In my head, I'm looking for the solution that allows me as a, leaning towards the back end, how do I make it so that the stuff that I deliver can be easily consumed and transformed and made better, more professional by somebody that's strong on the front end and strong on the user experience side. And this, I think, is just another tool in my tool belt where I can kind of bridge that gap. I don't have to expose GraphQL and make them do a bunch of work. I don't have to expose JSON or send them JSON and still make them design. I can kind of like give them, I see a channel, a path to create these HTMX elements that I can make easily consumable by somebody that's on the front end.
Right. With you saying that, there's some other thought I currently have now. Is one of the advantages of doing things like Thymeleaf and not have a JSON REST API is you don't need versioning, for example. It's and that's because like now, if you're on a bigger team, it's like, oh, let's not rename that to a better name because then the front end needs to, and then you need to create a ticket in Jira and it will come up in the next sprint and will break everything, and it's too small to really do a new version. And so, but if you're on Thymeleaf, it's all the same thing. Everything can work on everything. It's just one artifact, just one source version control repo. And I think that's a big advantage as well. You don't need this whole like, how will we do versioning in the URL and the headers, all these kind of questions. You just sidestep completely.
Yeah, and just to kind of double back, thinking through some of the things you just said, somebody asked like, what are the use cases for this? Being able to like rapidly get some type of like proof of concept out there. This is like a really great use case for this. I have, one application that I'm working on using Thymeleaf, using HTMX. I have a front end for it. I have a back end for it. I feel like I can rapidly develop something and get something out there without having to mess with 2 different types of applications, 2 different teams. Maybe DevOps is involved now. Like there's a lot going on there to kind of orchestrate all of that. So this is exciting for me.
And this is not a little thing. This is a really exciting thing that you said that now my head's like, man, how many times did I deliver an API that was spitting out JSON or something and have to like do that version dance and have to like, oh, let me add. It was not just that it was the JSON was changing. It was that I had to deal with another set of requirements and release things, the machinery. This is really, really exciting. And I'm using my kind of experience, my past of how many solutions could I have delivered differently? How would I deliver them differently today with this? And I'm thinking of dozens just off the top of my head, how just that alone, here's the element, here's what it's going to spit out. Just use it. That's great. I'll keep the back end secure. This is really, really cool. I like this a lot.
Cool. So we have a few more minutes. So if you have some questions, get them in there. We'll get them answered. I have a question here that DaShaun and I have answered before, but Wim has spoken at many conferences, given some really great talks. So I want to get your perspective on this. How can I start speaking at tech events? I'm a tech lead, but I've never spoken at any event. Any advice that you can share? So Wim, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this, how you got into speaking, any advice for those who want to get started doing it.
There's only one way. Just start. Find a topic you're passionate about and start talking. Start small maybe, and there's certainly some local Java user groups in your area. There are also some that like to get you remote. And then just put something in. Also, my first big conference was Spring I/O in Barcelona, and I never thought I would get there, but I like tried anyway. And then I got the mail like, you can come, and I was like, what, really? And so don't be shy. Just share your passion, and I'm sure it will get there.
Yeah, great.
One
great
thing we
tips.
say a lot is we were Spring developer advocates long before being on this team. And another thing I say for Rabah is start with your team, your tech lead. Start presenting your thoughts, your ideas to your team. Look for your local Java user group. And we've talked about this a few times, this idea of conference-driven development. Like put an abstract together. What would you like to talk about? And then give yourself a reason to go deep and learn that topic.
Yeah, great advice. Talking about something you're passionate always makes it a lot easier because you're interested in talking about it. And I really like the advice from Wim is just go for it. Like you do a couple of these small talks and then submit to a conference because chances are a lot of these conferences have seen a lot of the same talks and a lot of the same speakers and are definitely open to new speakers. So if there's like one of those checkboxes, sometimes there's a checkbox, like I'm a first-time speaker. I know as someone who is like approved talks, I'm always looking for that because I want to see new speakers out there. So yeah, do a couple of local talks, local user group at your team, do a lunch and learn, and then just go for it. So good luck to you. I'm sure.
Yeah.
And what?
I said the Happy Test has kind of a similar question. Like just dig in. Like how do I get to be good at Spring? Not only just like use it, but that level of contributing to the framework. The only way to get better at something is to do more of it. Code more. Do more examples. Present your thoughts, your opinions. Share. Because pull requests are welcome.
Yeah, and again, we talk about it a lot. Contributing to a framework doesn't mean you have to jump into Spring Framework source code and start changing things. This could be as simple as fixing something in the documentation, or even finding a bug, or telling the team, hey, this is how I specifically use that thing, and something came back a little bit indifferent of what I thought it was going to be. So just providing feedback to the team is contributing as well. So. We got another question here. Do you recommend Java as an introduction to imperative programming and Spring Boot to introduction to web development for students? Yeah, so most definitely. So I can speak from example for this. I worked at a coding boot camp, and we had 2 tracks. They were both full stack tracks. One was using .NET and C#, and the other was using Java and Spring Boot. And yes, we built full stack like web applications. They learned everything. So yeah, I think Java is an excellent programming language to get started with. Obviously, Spring Boot being one of the biggest frameworks in the Java ecosystem, definitely something to get started with. And yeah, you can use it to build web applications. I know we build a lot of REST APIs these days, but as we talked about today, you can build some modern front ends with Spring Boot, with Thymeleaf, and sprinkling in a little bit of HTMX. So absolutely.
Last question. Dan, where is the best place to ask questions, topics to Dan Vega and DaShaun?
Yeah, so we have a GitHub repo, an organization. So I'll go ahead and post this here. We have an organization with some repositories. So I'm going to post that one here, and we'll kind of share that out. But this one is our main organization. If you look under there, there are a bunch of different repos for learning, one of which is the Spring Office Hours podcast repo. And in there, we've opened up the discussion board, so you can go ahead and ask all your questions there. And on a normal show, we'll get to as many of those questions as possible. But today, we are a little bit busy talking to our friend of the show, Wim, and learning from him. So we'll get back to those questions next week, but that's a really good place to go ahead and ask your questions.
This is great for me for this week. You know, the hype was made real. Like all the cool kids are using HTMX, and it's gaining popularity in the Spring ecosystem. And this session that I got to witness, it definitely clarified. It showed me a lot of the cool stuff. I'll say that Thomas has definitely helped me along the way describing. But this is valuable. This is a great session.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. We really appreciate you coming on the show today, Wim. Before we get going, anywhere that we can find out more about you, where we can get all these goodies that you talked about today, go ahead and share out a few resources.
Yeah, so I have my personal website, and there's a blog there, so you can share that link. And then you can find me on Twitter as well. Or I should call it X nowadays, but I kind of refuse, but okay.
I'm with you.
So that's the main places where you can find me. You can follow my repos as well on GitHub. So I have this HTMX library, the command line tool. I have another tool on error handling for REST APIs, which we can talk about maybe on another day.
All right. And not to forget, LeanPub. You can pick up. Are all 3 your books on there, or just the 2?
No, there's one is an InfoQ book. That's one
yeah.
on REST APIs, and then the 2 others are on LeanPub. And the Taming Thymeleaf one, you can also buy it in a paper version if you like.
Nice.
As well.
Cool.
So on
again,
my website,
Wim,
you can find also some videos on all the examples you built with the HTMX books if you want to view that.
Yeah, and speaking of, I watched that video of you presenting at Spring IL last year. So if you people out there have not seen that one, go ahead and find that on YouTube. That was a really good presentation. So Wim, I really appreciate you coming on the show today. I wanted to dive deeper into HTMX, and both leading up to this interview, doing a little research myself, and then listening to you on both that presentation and today. I think I've got a lot more ammo, and I think I'm going to pick up the book, because I think just seeing some of those examples really start to like trigger my curiosity and like some of the things that I can do. So really appreciate you taking some time today.
For me, it's mission accomplished, and it was really great to be on the show.
I'll be honest.
A lot of fun.
I have one of the books, but I'm probably not going to read the book. I'm just going to ask you directly on your GitHub and Twitter.
Okay.
I'm just being real.
That's okay too.
All right. Great. Again, yeah, really appreciate you taking some time today. And for everyone else, we have some exciting shows coming up. We're leading up to the infamous Spring I/O. We have Spring I/O at the end of May. We are scheduling out some speakers in the month of May leading up to that conference. So please stay tuned for that. With that, we will see you in the next one. Appreciate you. Have a good one. Bye, everyone.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.